everyone. Welcome to my annual Kauai Comic-Con episode. I'm so excited to be hosting for the third year in a row, and today's special guest is none other than Ming Chen. Ming is an award-winning podcaster and host, I Sell Comics, and the Ming Mike Show podcast. He also stars in the AMC reality series Comic Book Men. Welcome, Ming.
Thank you so much. It's a huge honor being on with you. I just love meeting fellow podcasters. But you have a long resume of awesomeness, and this is amazing. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh my goodness. Well, the honor is all mine. And I agree. It is always nice to have a fellow podcaster on the show because, there's empathy. We know the struggle.
We've suffered, yes, editing audio files all night. Maybe losing little bits here and there, agonizing over audio quality.
Absolutely. But before I jump in, because I'm dying to talk to you about so many fun and cool things, I want to give a huge shout out to Kauai Comic-Con director Aaron Yamasato for introducing and connecting us today.
Aaron's a connector. He's a heck of a guy. And I don't think I've met anyone as happy as Aaron.
Oh my goodness. My husband and I have lengthy discussions on how can he be so happy all the time? We need to bottle that and sell it.
I think it's very easy to just move to Kauai, right?
Right. Yeah, this is true. Because when we were there, it was pretty nice. Like, shout out to Kauai.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Kauai and definitely check out Kauai Comic-Con.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the reasons I started podcasting was to share stories of others and build empathy. And I really feel like if anybody can understand some of the challenges, like you explained earlier, it's you. However, your early podcast experience was with the wonderful and amazing Kevin Smith. So did that make it like a little easier to break into the realm of podcasting, or
you would
still
think
struggle?
So. You would think so, right? But so yeah, I started podcasting because of Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith, early podcast pioneer, one of the biggest podcasters now, and he's one of the few guys who figured out how to make some money doing this. So he started way back in 2007, and he started because if you know Kevin, he likes to swear a lot. He's very honest, sometimes to a fault. And he'll talk about anything, and I think he was looking for a format where there were no restrictions on content, on time, and something where he could just be himself. And even he could go on talk shows. He'd get maybe 5 minutes. He tried radio for one night. They're like, well, you can't curse. You can't curse on the radio. There's the FCC. They have laws, and we get fined if you curse. Even when he was making movies. He had wanted to. I remember at one point, really early on, he's like, "Hey, I want to do a thing on our website where I post dailies and I give people a real inside look at the production of my movie. At the time, it was his fourth movie, Dogma, and I remember he was going to do all this, and then someone from above said, "You can't do that. You're going to ruin the movie. Like, no, we forbid you to give away these many secrets." Oddly enough, it was Harvey Weinstein who told him that he couldn't do this, which somewhat ironic. So, finally he was able to discover a format where he could be himself and just express himself and get it out to the masses.
Yeah.
And, so I was a guy who I was this tech guy. I sat behind the computer. I uploaded his podcast to iTunes and made sure that it got, after he recorded it, I took it over from there. And then a few years after that, he was like, "Hey, I'm starting a network. I need other shows that aren't just me. Like every show can't just be me. I need other voices.
Yeah.
I want you to start a podcast." And I'm like, what are you talking about? Why would I start a podcast? I'm not famous. I'm not a good storyteller like you. Of course, people will listen to you because you're Kevin Smith. Like, why? At the time, I was just known as a guy who worked for Kevin Smith. Let's hear a podcast about uploading files and
surprisingly though.
yeah. Now that I know that, a lot of people. But at the time, I was like, "There's no way." Like, where and what would I talk about? You have stories about meeting famous people and making movies and how you got there. I have none of that. What would I talk about? He's like, "Well, what do you like? What could you talk about for 45 minutes to an hour without researching it?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Star Wars, comic books, and food." He's like, "That's a podcast." Oh
exactly. A few people on this earth enjoy Star Wars, comic books, and food. Just a few. So I think your demographic outreach is pretty much set.
Yeah, but even then, I was so doubtful. I was like, "Listen, I don't I had no desire to be behind a microphone. I was like, well, I didn't go to broadcast school. I have no
Yeah.
experience doing this. He's like, it doesn't matter. You just be yourself, and you'll find your audience. And I was still doubtful. I was like, who's gonna listen to me talk about Star Wars comic books and food? He's like, well, people who like Star Wars comic books and so, a lot of things I do because of at his insistence.
Yeah.
It's funny when you work with Kevin Smith, like weird things happen. You start podcasting. You go to you set up all day film festivals for him.
Mhm.
You wind up on a reality TV show. It's so weird, but he's a great motivator. And yeah, so one at his insistence, sat down with some podcast gear in the back of a comic book shop. I grabbed fellow comic book men. Co-star Mike Zapcic,
Mhm.
and we started a podcast called I Sell Comics. The first one, we didn't know what we were doing, but I had a list of things that I wanted to talk about. Kevin asked me to, if I could fill 45 minutes to an hour, and we ended up going 2 hours with that. So, 'cause, it's so much fun. And
Yes.
yeah, that was back in 2010, 2011, and we've been going ever since. I think we just recorded our 313th episode. And
Amazing, amazing. Like, kudos to you because I like we kind of talked about earlier. It's a bit of a struggle. Like I love that it's part of your career. It's a big part of what you are able to do. Like for me, this is just a passion project and everything. But like I love also the opportunity to kind of share disaster stories because it's such a rarity that I have a fellow podcaster on the show. And even though I am not a professional like you are, I definitely feel like maybe I have more disasters because I had to just kind of figure this out. But I'm guessing that you have a few that you could possibly share.
oh, disaster! I mean, we've all recorded that awesome podcast, and then it's computers, right? Something always goes wrong.
Yeah.
Or, you try to prevent that, but we don't control ones and zeros, bits and bytes. I don't know how Apple works their magic or anything. So the worst thing that could ever happen is you lose an entire episode that
Yeah.
you spend an hour and change recording. The conversations were spontaneous and magical, and something goes wrong, and there's nothing more frustrating than that. And now if you look behind me, I actually run a podcast studio now where I rent
Yes.
to other people and I help other people launch podcasts. And you can't lose any episodes. Like that's your job, is to, record great quality episodes for other people. So with all disasters, it's a learning experience. So after that first one, it's like, okay, how do I prevent this so this never happens again? So I have like now I have like 3 backup recorders going, and I'll record it digitally to my computer, and I'll get it on the board, and multiple recorders, and however, yeah, what now I prepare for every disaster. And
Yeah, contingency is key. I've found, and as an indie filmmaker, that's another thing too. Contingency is key. Like you just know, plan for the worst, and hopefully the best outcome will happen. But I want to also kind of talk to you a little bit about that learning process because you just mentioned the learning, and I think that's huge because as a kung fu teacher, it's my nature to constantly feel like teaching and learning, it goes hand in hand. And one of the things I've loved so much about podcasting is that I learn every episode. And I was curious, like what you feel maybe you've learned about yourself through podcasting.
Oh man, I think I learned a lot. So when I was growing up, high school, college, I was very shy. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't talk to anybody unless spoken to. I would never initiate a conversation. I hated. I was just afraid of awkward silences, and the biggest fear is like, well, what if I don't know what if I don't know what to say? I think that's the biggest fear for everybody is especially when you meet new people. It's like, hey, how are you? My name's Ming. Then what? I didn't know. And I preferred to keep to myself. And a lot of people are like, wow, you were quiet in high school, because now all I do is talk into a microphone. All I do is podcast with people. All I do is meet people at Comic-Cons or after. But it took a long time to get to that point. But I think podcasting really brought me out of that shell for sure. And I mean, I think that's a very positive thing. It's definitely helped me with just basic interactions with people, meeting people. But I think people like me and you, we get asked to moderate panels now or host cosplay contests or things like that, and that's made I think it's made me a way better interviewer, and just speaker in general. And yeah, now I feel very comfortable behind a microphone. I feel very comfortable meeting new people. I love meeting new people and just kind of putting them at ease, which then puts me at ease. Yeah, I really found out, I was like, wow, this is what I was missing out by not talking to other people in a room. So it's definitely helped out with that. Um, and yeah, after I somehow wound up on a TV show, and then I get invited to Comic Cons, it's just I really want to meet people and find out their stories.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
yeah,
love that. And Comic Cons are a lot of fun. And of course, the pandemic kind of threw us a huge curveball with the nature of the cons. And hopefully, in the future, we're on a path back to having some normality with that. So, what was that year like for you without having the conventions? Because I know that's a huge part of what you do. You go around. I've only been to a handful of them and I've loved all of them, but I did get to host a panel at San Diego Comic Con, which is very, very cool. But for you, it must have been just kind of a huge slice of life that was missing.
Yeah, it was tough. So I started getting invited to Comic Cons around 2013, 2014, and from the very first one, I was like, "Whoa, this is fun." I would go to Comic Cons as a fan, and that was fun. But to get invited to one where listen, I gotta be honest, like you don't have to wait in lines anymore. They invite you, so you don't even have to buy a ticket anymore. And then you kind of so I've been in front of the table waiting in line for autographs, waiting for in line for selfies or commissions or to meet artists. Now I got to be behind the table, and I was like, "Whoa, this is a lot of fun too." Yeah, I started ramping up. 2014. I was like, "Wow, this is fun. How do I go to more?" So I started reaching out to conventions, and like I would sometimes just pick a city that I wanted to visit. If they had a Comic Con, if they did, I would hit them up on Facebook or Twitter, or if they had an email address, like, "Hey, my name is Ming Chen. You might know me from Comic Book Ben. So you have a con coming up. Do you have room for an extra guest who will bring his best and loves having a good time at cons?"
Mhm.
And a lot of the times they were like, "Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for reaching out.
Right.
Can you come out?" I'm like, "Yeah." So it was a great opportunity to not only go to a con but see a city that I'd never been to,
Absolutely.
meet a lot of cool people. So I started out, I think maybe I did like 10 cons the first year, and by the time like 2018, 2019 rolled around, I was up to like 25 or 30 a year.
Wow.
Which was sometimes it was almost every weekend.
Mhm.
Sometimes I would fly home, like do my laundry, and the next morning be out to another city, and I loved it. I loved it. And then when the pandemic came around and they started slowly getting canceled or postponed, I mean, we saw it coming, and we thought it would be short lived, and it wasn't. And then I was like, okay, I don't know when these things are going to come back. It it was sad. It felt like a piece of me was missing every weekend. It would have been worse if the cons were still going on and then I couldn't go, because then you get that
Right. FOMO.
missing out. But now that none of them were going on, I didn't feel as bad.
Okay.
But I was texting my friends like, "Oh man, we would have been at San Diego this week. We would have been
Exactly.
in New York. We would have been, where in Houston."
Well, every year, this is the second virtual Comic Con I'm hosting at Kauai. I'm really bummed that you and I are not sitting in Kauai, Hawaii right now.
Yeah, but as most places, they're like, "Okay, we're not canceling, it's just postponing. We're
Yes.
postponing." So, can I wait, another year to, finally be at a table next to you, enjoying the Kauai sunshine and if that's it's a small price to pay, especially after what we're going through,
Absolutely.
and it when they do come back, and some of them are coming back now, we're gonna appreciate it that much more.
Absolutely. Yes. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, as that they say. But you're right. It just feels like we're close. We're right on the edge of it. But I'm with you. I think safety is like the number one thing. So I'm grateful also that we're still able to podcast and host a Comic Con and be in this platform where we can still connect and have this opportunity. Because if this happened several years ago, we would all just be sitting in our homes, by ourselves.
Yeah, I think we would have been going crazy. Yeah, if there was no, no Netflix, no,
Yeah.
no Zoom conferencing, no, no hardcore internet ways to entertain ourselves. Yeah, I think, I think it just would have been a horrible, horrible experience.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we're not in that. So I also want to take the opportunity to talk to you about comics because although I was very late to the game in the world of comics, I'm a huge comic book geek. And like you said earlier, I've had a lot of comic creators on my show. That's part of my podcasting thing too. It's like I just want to talk to the people I'm super curious about meeting and enjoying finding out what their journey has been. So, but what drew you to comics?
I got my first comic book when I was 6 years old. Of course, before that, I knew when I was younger than that. Yeah, I knew who Batman was. I was aware of Batman and Superman and Spider Man, but I couldn't read. I couldn't read a whole comic book prior to that. 3, 4 years old. So when I was six, a fellow classmate in first grade gave me a copy of the Avengers. It was issue 214. I still have it. It's definitely an artifact in my history. And on the cover is Iron Man, and he's fighting Ghost Rider. And in the background, you see Captain America. He's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And I remember him handing it to me. I was like, "What is this?" He's like, "Well, it's a comic book. Read it. It's got pictures and words and superheroes." And I saw that cover. I was blown away. I was like, "What? What is this? This wasn't Jack and Joe Roll Down the Hill. This isn't a nursery rhyme, or Dr. Seuss."
Dr. Seuss, yeah.
These are, there's a guy in gold and red armor, and this guy with the flaming skull, and a guy with a shield. I was like, what is this? So I devoured that comic. I read it cover to cover. I remember being, the comic was great. I remember being especially entranced by the ads, though. So there was the ads for like the X-ray specs and fart powder and invisible ink and sea monkeys. There were ads for the Saturday morning cartoons at the time.
Oh, okay.
Like the Hostess fruit pie ads. But I like that was, I think, pretty much the only artifact of pop culture that I really had. I had toys, but this thing was a whole story, and I just I remember becoming almost borderline obsessed with it. I would just read everything from front cover to back cover over and over. And that I think I was hooked immediately since from there, and that's why I think all kids should be given comic books or get exposed to comic book culture for sure.
Agreed. And for you seeing those comics, I love talking about the historical concept of you had to wait for the next issue to come out, because that still kind of happens in comics, whereas the Netflix and the Hulu binge type of feeling, like it's very different in terms of what the youth is willing to wait for.
Yeah.
And so, but because like we're all here waiting for Saga to come back and all of our comics to come back and everything. So what was that like for you as you kind of waited for each comic to come out? And were you a collector as well? So did you collect all the different trades, and was that part
of my parents didn't give me a lot of money back then, so I had to rely on friends who would pick up issues, or I'd be like, "What do you mean?" and pick up the Batman 247 this week. And none of us had cars. My friend didn't make it to the drugstore that week to pick it off the rack. So it was when I was younger, it'd be random comics that I could procure either through friends or cheaply, or sometimes I would just be out and I happened to have some money, so I would buy random issues. Here and there. So I didn't really get into collecting until maybe later on in high school, when I discovered like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I started collecting like Daredevil and Batman back then. And I think it wasn't until I get a little older that there were actually physical shops devoted to comics. Like I remember discovering my first comic book only shop in the town I grew up in later on in high school, and I was like, "Whoa, what is this? Like, this is you only sell comics and back issues here? This is..."
And the lights were coming down upon the shop.
Like, you're a genius. You guys are gonna make $1 million, and I don't think they made anything close to $1 million.
Unfortunately, it's a tough industry, but
they love what they did. But and you were talking in the anticipation, new comics come out monthly. If they're serialized. And I like that as well, because I would talk about my friends like, "Oh, did you read what was in the last issue?" End on a cliffhanger, we would spend all month waiting for that next issue, and it sparked a lot of discussion, a lot of speculation, and yeah, now with the binge watching mentality that we have, yeah, I think we've lost some of that. And so that's why I miss the days of, like Game of Thrones would come out every Sunday night, and people would have like viewing parties every Sunday night and talk about what happened in the last episode. And I think that's really changed fandom now that you get it all at once. Mandalorian. I'm glad that things like that they release weekly, and and I get the Marvel TV shows, WandaVision, Falcon, Winter Soldier.
Mhm.
They don't give it all to you at once. I think that's a good thing.
I do too. I think there's something to be said for the patience, but like you just mentioned, I'm in book clubs and there's something to be said for having those discussions,
Yeah.
right? It's not only just to kind of be geeky about it, but I think there's a creativity and just so much that happens organically there that we lose out on when we're just like, well, we want the beginning, we want the end, and we want it to be done, right? But
Yeah.
if you kind of go along with it and fast forward now, what you're doing with, comic book men and having all this knowledge, it's because you read those issues over and over and over. So you really understand the characters versus I read that book once in high school. I don't really remember it because I just read it, right? As that process happens, you really get to know the characters because I unfortunately came into comics late, and so a lot of things were finished. I would read things in completion because I'm impatient and I didn't want to wait, and here I am like lecturing on how we should be patient. But my husband knows so much about characters. I'm like, how do you know all this? He goes, because I only had one issue to read for a month.
Yeah, I read it over and over, dissected it, read, we were not desperate, but we would read even the letters columns,
Yeah.
or you learn a lot. You actually learn a lot from those letters comic.
Absolutely. That's actually one of my favorite parts of comics that I kind of miss if they're not there.
Yeah, for sure. But I understand. I remember I didn't read Walking Dead originally, so I started with the trade paperbacks, and I was devouring those things. You could read a Walking Dead trade paperback probably in about an hour or so.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky because I have the comic book shop, so I read the first one. I was like, "Whoa, well, this is great!" So I would walk back to the store, put it back. The second one, I think I was maybe like 5 trade paperbacks behind before I caught up to when they were making them, and I couldn't imagine reading something like Walking Dead, like waiting.
Yeah, it's such a journey. It's such a
The next
journey.
one. So there's of course there's something to be said about trade paperbacks, binge watching. But yeah, I think we lose that month-long discussion. But I guess the way people deal with that now is there are all these like recap podcasts.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
They'll talk about the shows, or they'll even talk about old shows that came out 30 years ago and dissect each episode. And I always laugh. I find it ironic that the recap episode is longer than the actual episode that they're talking.
Yeah, some of them go way deep and I'm like, is this really a thing, or are they just theorizing, or did it just go over my head? But these recap episodes actually have been super helpful for shows that I've really enjoyed, but maybe I just felt like I missed something because I don't know the backstory enough. Like I loved HBO's Watchmen,
Yeah.
and I would have to watch the explanation episodes almost every episode because
Yeah.
I felt so not in the know. I was like, what is happening? But it's so good. I just can't explain any of it. So I'm grateful for those.
We learned so much, right? So a lot of my favorite movies, I was like, okay, they'll mention something like a historical event or something like, oh, I didn't know anything about that. And after the movie, I'll go back and research that topic. Like that's one of my favorite things to do, I think. So that's
Absolutely.
yeah, that's
Is
cool.
there a comic that has like really surprised you that you were maybe reluctant to read that someone recommended? Or is there a book or comic or something that you could think of that you were like, man, I really didn't think I was gonna love this, but that it ended up kind of being super, super exciting for you, or something
Oh
you kind
man,
of
I
took to?
think before I was reading Marvel and DC and Image, so kind of like the big 3 comics, and I would read books about established superheroes, because I knew them already. I had an emotional attachment to them. I think maybe in the late '90s, a lot of independent books started coming out, and I remember, yeah, I was wary about them at first. I was like, what do you mean this comic's about what 4 Ninja Turtles? Like, why would you make turtles into ninjas? And then, of course, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are amazing. And yeah, so now I'll read everything.
Mhm.
Um, the yeah, before I had to go and buy comic books, and yeah, I didn't have a lot of money, so I treasured each of those books and I really appreciated them. Now when I go to Comic Cons, I'll meet independent creators and they'll give me their issues to read, and of course I'll help promote them. It's like, hey, take a photo with your issue, and you can do whatever you want with the photo. Definitely say that I endorsed it personally. If that helps you, get published or sell more issues, absolutely. And I love reading those now. I love all the independent creators. I wasn't maybe so accepting of them in the early days because this isn't Superman. Like who? Yeah, but now, yeah, like, you made this. This came from your heart. Like of course, I'm gonna read it and give you feedback on it. Um, and I think probably independent comics now are probably the most important comic book properties out there. I talked to the great Todd McFarlane once, who mentions like, hey, listen, indie comics are really important now. All the major properties, all the major characters, all their rights have been bought out by the movie companies in anticipation of hopefully making a TV or movie series and making a bunch of money off of those. So what's left now is the independent creators that people don't really know about. Those are the ones that are going to rise up. There's going to be a really, really great independent story out there from somebody in Maine or Iowa or whatever, and that's going to be the next big thing. Just someone has to discover that, and that's they're going to have all the power soon.
Well, I think that's nice though, because you want to get those different aspects. You want to get that different creativity. You want new stories to be told, and it makes it much more interesting to us as readers as well. Now, you've mentioned, in passing that, okay, you didn't have a lot of money to get all the comics that you wanted. And I love the fact that you were so nostalgic. You somehow held on to that first comic that you ever read, and you still have it. Now, I grew up in Orlando, Florida in the 80s, and it was not a very diverse city. And I understand you grew up in Ohio. Is that true?
I was born in Ohio. Actually, I've moved around a lot. So
Okay.
my father was a upstart engineer, and so he kept getting better jobs. And with the Asian parents, they want to put you in a place with a good school system and a good environment. So bless them for that. I didn't appreciate it at the time. So somebody asked me, is like, hey, count up all the different cities you've lived in through your life and just throw out the numbers. I think his kid was doing a school project or something, and I started counting. I was like, wow, mine is kind of high. I've lived in 13 different cities in my life. So
Really, really.
yeah, I grew up mainly in the Midwest though. So
Okay.
like Indiana, Michigan. End up going to school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So it was a good upbringing. Bringing not exactly geek friendly at the time though,
Okay.
but I think that's pretty much everywhere in general.
Yeah, I mean, geek friendly. It's so interesting because that word has evolved so much over
Oh,
time.
yeah.
But for me, I'm trying to identify with you because obviously we're both Asian American, and there's a lot going on now for Asian Americans for one. But in terms of your upbringing, because you moved around so much, but you were in kind of that Midwest area, what was that dynamic like for you? Because for me, I was very aware of the fact that I was very different from the majority of who was around me, right? I was kind of that Asian girl, the token, the shortest one. And I always win the same place at the picture every year because it's by height. And so
We're always in the first row.
always
Always,
in the front.
yeah, which is not a bad thing because people, people notice you, people see you. Yeah, I think I was very lucky. The upper Midwest, I think was a little more accepting, maybe not as diverse. At any given time when I was growing up in elementary school, maybe there was another Asian, a Filipino Filipino kid, maybe a couple kids from India or with an Indian background. Um, but yeah, it was I think everyone was fairly accepting. Of course, I got the kung fu jokes. I got in the early days. Very rarely I would get maybe not a slanty eye joke, but just some of the. But no, I was never really bullied too much. I think I got pretty lucky on that. Yeah. Although I have whenever I felt threatened though, if anybody did try to bully me or maybe just act tough, I remember what I would do. I would tell these kids like, "Hey, you better back off because Bruce Lee's my uncle." And whoa, yeah, I used yeah, and this was in
Way to
1983.
throw stereotypes back and use that as your defense. I love it.
Yeah, I really reached though for the ultimate, the ultimate badass. I'm like, listen, you better not mess with me. Bruce Lee's my uncle. Now, yeah, this is 1983, mind you. They didn't know he'd passed away 10 years prior. So but I use that. I use that a couple of times just in case things got almost heated and they would back off immediately. So
Really, really, that's fascinating. I think there's something really interesting about which you shared, and thank you for that. I think it's interesting because when you and I grew up, there's discussions that we had at the time. There are things that are said to us, and we don't consider it like we were in this oppressive and very, highly racially charged time period. But, fast forward to now and kind of seeing the dynamic between the knowledge of what words like that impacts and how that can impact people is very different. So for example, a youth of today hearing some of the things that you are hearing would probably be impacted very differently because of what they've seen. For example, seeing elderly Asians being abused on the street. And so they, I think, would take it very differently. I think when we grew up, there was kind of more of a lightness, but also maybe an awareness, right? Like ignorance is bliss. Like we didn't know that could lead to being racist or that could lead to something more. And thank goodness Bruce Lee was your uncle. Otherwise you might've gotten beaten up. But you know what I'm saying? I think that it's so interesting that just in our generation, how we've seen kind of that shift in how words do matter. And those words today would be taken very differently, I think.
yeah, I think back in the early '80s, yeah, I just brushed it off. I had to. Had I gone to a teacher or principal or whatever, I think they would have, oh, okay, just ignore them, right? That's that's what the teachers back in the day or the older people would just say. It's like, oh, just ignore them, they'll go away. And of course they never did, but the ignoring them never really worked. So I think if I got caught in a situation like that, I would counteract it with humor, and then and actually that would make them stop. They're like, eventually they realize, hey, Ming's a funny guy. He's he's not a threat. He's not really different from us. I think a lot of people realize that, hey, I'm better off being friends with this guy rather than picking on him. There's no, I don't get anything from picking on him, but if we could become friends. So I think that's how I diffused any uncomfortable situations or any potentially racial situations. And I guess that worked out for me later on in life.
Yeah, you started practicing your humor and
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I have to say, yeah, I was lucky. A lot of people were like, hey, especially now, they're like, hey, did you experience any, heavily racial incidents when you were growing up? And I think back, I'm like, no, not. I was pretty lucky. Whether I diffuse that myself or not, I'd have to go back and remember those situations. But yeah, I was. Yeah, I learned to defeat it by using humor, though.
I
Which
think that is a very valid technique, though, because when we talk about bullying and whether it's racially charged or not, one of the things is being able to communicate with that other person in
yeah,
whatever way and get through to them and get them to stop is essentially the biggest thing. And there is no 100% answer because it's all such a personal interaction that it's never the same every time. I mean, there are some things that you can do technique wise, but I just find the conversation super interesting because of the dynamic and what's happening now. And you have family, and I'm sure that you get questions like, what's
um,
happening right now? Why is this happening? Because maybe since generationally speaking, a lot of the kids that I've come in contact with since I teach youths, it's like they never really experienced what they're seeing on TV, but they're scared to
yeah.
that it could escalate to that. So, my advice is usually, yeah, diffuse it, but correct it and let people know like this isn't okay. But what advice would you give to someone or youth or family that's asking you? Because obviously what's happening right now is unacceptable and infuriating and
Yeah,
hard to manage.
rather what I, than what I pretty much ignored it, and it happened very rarely in my youth. But anytime it did, I mean, I had no choice but to. I couldn't really tell anybody because back then they would just brush it off.
Yeah, you didn't feel heard.
Now everyone's aware of it. Now it's a serious problem now, and the only way to stop it is if you say something. And I know for a lot of people that's tough. to you can sometimes it's easier to ignore it, but I think if you ignore it, the worse it becomes. And now that everyone's aware of it, yeah, you can tell people like, listen, this guy, this person was, that what they're saying is not right. I think something should be done about it. And yeah, I would encourage anyone, if someone's made you uncomfortable, definitely say something, because now, we live in a time now where it will be dealt with. And it will be dealt with quickly too, which is good. It's just sad. I think I the huge uptick in just violence and racial incidents. It just makes me sad. I had to laugh at one incident. I think I was at the store or something, and I overheard a gentleman. He was talking to his phone and to someone, and they were like, basically the gist of his conversation was like, screw the Chinese. Like, I will never buy anything made in China or Asia again. As he's talking into his iPhone with China, I'm like, okay, see that. So I had to kind of laugh at that. I was like, okay, that's how ignorant some people are, and they're just not, they're just not educated. I know emotions have been running high in the last 14, 15 months. But yeah, I think if I had the opportunity to sit down with that guy at a bar, I'm like, listen, your phone is made in Asia. Like, pretty much, you couldn't live, you couldn't live the life that you're accustomed to if you were not using things made in Asia or.
Yeah, it'd be very difficult.
Yeah, I think if I laid it out that way, I was like, I think he would understand. So I know it was a heat of the moment thing, and I wish I think we're heading toward that point where more people are becoming more aware of, listen, we're all just people, like I know you're angry. I know it's been a tough year, but you're definitely misdirecting your anger in the wrong direction. You could probably use that energy in a more constructive manner. Yeah.
Well said.
It's tough though. I don't, I mean, no one likes to see anybody get attacked for no reason. But I think for me and you, if we see an elderly Asian woman get attacked, we think, that could have been my mom.
Yeah,
it could have
absolutely.
been my grandmother. And yeah, they didn't do anything to deserve this. So I definitely feel for those people. And I, yeah, I hope there's a downturn in all of that soon. It's funny, we were trapped in our houses all this time, right? So I thought, and we were fighting an enemy that saw no color, no borders, no race, no gender, whatever. And I thought this would have brought us together more. And I don't know if it did, and maybe in here and there, but I really thought, we would have been found some more common ground through this.
Yeah, I'm with you there. There was a big frustration in the beginning. You thought, wow, well, this is something literally worldwide, not just a United States problem, not just a Europe problem, not just it was a worldwide problem. So it was something that should have been unifying, like you see in the movies at Independence Day and Will Smith and like everyone, the whole world. It's didn't work out that way. I really feel the same as you. It's been so divisive. And if it's a matter of us just loving one another, wanting our loved ones to be safe, like that's the ultimate goal. And it just feels kind of the opposite. And like you said, it feels like the people who are so angry are trying to blame someone. They can't fight the virus.
Right.
Go and hit or attack the virus. And unfortunately, of course, they're taking it out on Asians. But I mean, to take it out on Asian elderly, I am pretty charged about this. I've been doing a lot of activism here down in Florida and kind of really super charged about it. But it's super infuriating. And unfortunately, I'm a little concerned it will get a little worse before it'll get better.
Yeah, unfortunately. And yeah, we're running through the whole range of emotions. We're sad first of all, but then we get angry and infuriated and confused, and yeah, there's so many emotions. And I'm trying to figure out that we have the Stop Asian Hate and the hashtags. Does that work? I don't know. At least more people are aware of it. You might see someone might be more willing to stop it or say something, and I guess that's the first step into fighting something like this, is it just bring awareness to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things on my campaign for this has been first, of course, awareness. And I think we're finally there. Shout out to amazing Amanda Wen and Daniel Wu and a lot of Daniel Day Kim, who really was out there in the media and did what they needed to do to bring light to it. But then after that, it's just kind of like the cry for help, the cry for stop doing it. But what can we do in terms of action? And it's a tough thing, but I think it starts with even conversations like this and all of us understanding that this happens, it shouldn't happen, and correcting things when we hear them because we don't want it to escalate and perpetuate. And a big initiative I'm doing, and I will take every opportunity I can to constantly throw out my petition, which is to include Asian American history in the education curriculum. I think we're just lacking in knowledge of what Asian Americans' place has been and why systemic racism is there and perpetuating that. So, I mean, these little steps, they will all add up, but while you're in it, it just feels like we're not moving anywhere. And it's really, it can be a little bit frustrating at times.
That's awesome. Yeah. I don't think people realize, before I think I took a course in college about Asian and Chinese American history. Yeah. They don't really teach that in schools, but
no.
if you don't even dig that deep, Asians helped build this country. Like big way. If there were no Asians, if they didn't come over, I don't think we would be where we are now. And that's excluding all the technology and all that. The Asians contributed a large part in not only the building of this country, but in the history of people as a whole. And you teach history. There are good parts, there are bad parts as well. And that's how we don't repeat history as we learn about it. So I agree with you. I think that'd be a worthwhile piece of a curriculum to teach to kids for sure.
Definitely. I mean, and of course, our culture is not the only one that needs to be taught. There's so many more strides that need to be made for other BIPOC community members. But I have seen that a few states have started that initiative. So I was super excited about it. I'm, working with people in Congress to try to get that bill passed here. And so it's little steps that we can all do. Even as simple as signing a petition. That means you're doing action. And I think a big part of during the pandemic, during seeing things like this happen, we feel we don't have action to take because we feel helpless. So I urge everyone to know, like, you can do things and these small steps do add up. So, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me about that. I know that it's not your normal comic book, light and fun stuff, but I think that as an Asian American, and it's important, you're so influential and you have so many fans that it's important that they know that, this is all very real and there's more that we can all do.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I mean, if I can even some way help influence one person or a couple people, that's totally worth it for sure.
Absolutely. So I know a big part of what you do is help others podcast. So you mentioned you're at a studio now and you help other people podcast. And so I'm sure people are listening and they want to be the next Ming Chen and they want to be the next one to have so many followers and have people listening in on a platform. Like, what advice is your kind of general advice to give to people who want a podcast?
If you have questions, definitely contact me. So I fell in love with podcasting so much, which is ironic. As I told you earlier, I didn't even want to do this. I didn't want to talk into a microphone. I would help other people who wanted to do it, but I had no desire to step behind a microphone. Once I did get behind that mic the first time, I became hooked instantly. I was like, whoa, I have a platform where I can talk about whatever I want and bring it to a worldwide audience. And whether they listen or not, that's up to me. But the people who do listen and give me feedback, it's addicting, podcasting. It's great. And if you have a great friend that you're always having conversations or back and forths with, you should definitely podcast. Whether you argue about movies or you agree or you do both, that's a podcast. And so I think one of the things I learned as a pop culture and comic book fan is when you discover something cool and you discover the X-Men or Wolverine, you want to share with other people who know nothing about it. You're like, oh, I just found something really cool. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And then when you get hooked on it, then we can talk about it. And nowadays it's like, well, then we can record a podcast about it, which is great. And so I feel the same way about podcasting. I was like, I love this so much that I want to share that love with other people. And so what we did about 3 years ago, we had always joked around about opening like a studio or a classroom where we could teach other people, how much fun this is. And then the goal would be, once they found out how much fun this was, they could come back every week and record their shows. And so we started that about 3 years ago. It's called A Shared Universe, A Shared Universe. And we took that name. That name is twofold. One, we took it from the comic books where, like the Avengers, we get, Spider-Man will all of a sudden pop in with Captain America and they'll fight Iron Man and Ant-Man and, or, villains will cross over. We always loved that. We always loved it when comic characters would cross over and share their universes. But here in the studio, we have podcasts ranging from like real estate law to health and wellness to sports to beer. Everyone's got their own passions. Everyone's got their own universes, which all come together here in our studio. So that was the second meaning of our studio. But we started this as a total experiment. I was like, all right, we love podcasting. Will other people love it? Will other people be willing to come down once a week for an hour with their friends and do this? And we learned very quickly that yes, they love it just as much as we do, if not more.
Yeah,
I got to help them. I got to help launch their podcast. Makes me like so happy.
yeah, I think there's just something to be said for people wanting to have a voice and wanting to be heard. And it's really cool that there's this platform. How do you see the future of podcasting? Because you, like Kevin Smith, one of the first, like very early pioneering in this, and now there's so many, but is it still a market that's kind of untapped, or do you feel like it's overflooded?
I believe so. I know it seems like everyone's starting a podcast now, but there are still people out there who have never listened to a podcast. There's there's a small minority who don't even know what they are, and I actually like meeting those people because I get to make them aware of what podcasts and podcasting is, and I love telling them, like, listen, there's a podcast for everything. No matter how wide a subject is, there's some really niche podcasts out there too. And I tell people, like, whatever you're interested in, whether it's sports or you love knitting, or you just love coffee or whatever, there's a podcast for that. So back when we started 10 years ago, it was not so easy. You had to go and buy gear, and then you had to figure out how to work it, use it, and then you had to figure out how to upload it and edit it, and it was a whole week-long process to release an episode. And so that's where we kind of come in. It's like, listen, you don't have to worry about all of that. We have the gear here. We'll edit for you. We'll upload for you. Just come in and talk. And so I wanted to reduce anything that would prevent people from starting.
Right. Yeah. I'm kind of thinking, man, I wish I had known you when I started podcasting. Fortunately, I came from that indie film background. And so the edit part wasn't so horrible because it's audio edit, but it's still not my favorite part of podcasting, to be honest, the tech side.
I like talking and I like recording, but yeah, everything else, like, okay, kind of a chore. But, but you asked that, what advice I would have for anybody who wants to start this. The barriers to entry are not that, there are no barriers. I would say just start, and people are like, well, what do I need to buy gear? Do I have to buy a mixing board and microphones? But I always say, listen, your first one, if you want to find out how much fun this is and you just want to get a recording down, just, whip out one of these. Everyone's got a smartphone now. Almost every smartphone has a voice memos app on it. And you paid so much for these phones. The microphones are actually really good. So as long as you and maybe you have a co-host, just get close to the phone and just start recording your first episode. And, it'll save your MP3 file. If you want to upload it somewhere for distribution, you can. But I think that's a great way to test out with something that you already have, something that you have in your pocket. You can record your first episode and see if that's something that if you like to do.
Yeah, it's very accessible to so many people. Yep. And I think you and I have obviously drank the Apple Kool-Aid. And so we're talking about MacBooks earlier, and we're both on our phones, but you're right. I actually use it when I am on location doing any filming as backup, because why not have it record just in case? Because sometimes you can use that audio. So it's very handy. So I can't wait to see what else is out there. But you're right. Lots of stories to be told, just like the indie comics. In terms of podcasting, there's something for everybody.
Yeah. And then if you discover it's for you, either come to our studio ideally, but if you're nowhere near here, you can pick up a USB microphone like the one you're using for $70-$80 to start
Right.
out. Very accessible, and start recording from there. Um, but and then you asked about the future of podcasting. So when we started the studio, I was like, okay, great, this will be relatively simple. We're just recording audio, right? Podcasts are audio only. We'll record audio, edit it, upload it. It goes on to Spotify and iTunes, and then that was it. As we started, we discovered you could hook up a webcam and live stream your podcast. So I was like, oh, that could be fun. So we started doing it just to explore the technological aspects and just figure out how to do it. And inherently, it's not that interesting watching two people at a table talk, but people will watch it, including me. So later on down the line, our clients caught wind of this. They're like, "Oh, are you live streaming? Can we do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so. We'll do that." And now everybody wants it. So I think the future is actually will incorporate a video element, and I think a lot of people will want to live stream as well. There are platforms out there you can live stream, interact with the audience, which is really amazing. And yeah, I definitely think that's a future. I didn't want to incorporate video. It's like, excuse me. Yeah, I didn't want to incorporate video just because it was another aspect.
Yes.
You got to buy gear and SD cards and focus and lighting. But I think that's kind of where we're heading. So.
Yeah, I think also because of quarantine, we're so all used to the Zoom and seeing one another, and people are kind of used to now watching two people talking on screen, and it's become more normalized. So I'm kind of with you, and I'm kind of cringing about it because what I loved about podcasting was that I didn't have to worry about video and syncing and all of that. As when I do film stuff, it's like, oh, it just takes one more that extra step, which can get complex. But you're right. I think that there is a lot of draw to the live stream and that interaction and something about being live. And I think there's all of that. Now, as we start to wrap up, obviously you've been working with Kevin Smith for a really long time, and he's just got such a huge cult following. And I know you've talked about him at length, and I know that you guys all are constantly kind of talking about the culture, but what is something you can share that maybe a lot of people may not realize about him, or that you've come to learn through your friendship, and it sounds like even mentorship, as he's been the one that basically pushed you into this world?
I think that's the big thing is, whether he's trying to or not, he's been a huge influence in my life, definitely. But if you listen to him, almost every one of his interviews or Q&As is, whatever you love doing, keep doing it. Life is so short that if you're going to a job you hate, but you really want to make film or you really want to podcast, you should find a way to shift over to that and make your living. That's part of the reason why I opened the studio, was because I wanted to podcast and make a living at it, and not only that, but share that love with other people and help them podcast. And when I started, I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. Will people pay money to rent a studio for an hour specifically to podcast? And as we know now, yes, it's a pretty big thing. But no matter how far fetched, he was like, listen, if that's what you love doing, go and do it. Because that's what I did. In the 90s, I wanted to make a movie, and back then it was all Hollywood. You needed $1 million budgets, and he went and just got 10 credit cards, sold his comic book collection, made Clerks for $27,000. Listen, and he was the ultimate example. Guys like him and Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino to an extent. Like, listen, we found a way to do it. And based on that, we were able to do it over and over again and make a living at it. And he really kind of opened my eyes to that. Where, my parents are still calling me. They still want me to get a real job.
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
Yeah, they don't. Even when I started working with Kevin many years ago, they were like, "Who is this guy?" I was like, "Well, he's a movie director. He makes movies." And I'm his tech guy. I work on his website and his online store, and they didn't really get it. They got the filmmaker part, and they kind of read up on him, but they didn't really. They still don't. I don't think they still understand what I do. And
Do they listen to your show or watch your show?
the TV show they watched a few episodes,
Okay.
which I think they enjoyed. I don't think they listen to any of the podcasts, but I think one of the kind of big things I did in my life though is I went home one over Christmas, packed some podcast gear, and one morning after breakfast, like, hey mom, can you sit down? I want to interview you for a podcast. And the first thing she said, she's like, "Oh, I'm not dressed for this. I don't have any makeup on." I was like, "Mom, it's just audio. It's just audio. I just want to interview you." And I'm so glad I did because I learned so many things. I should have asked more questions as I was growing up. 'Cause I didn't. I know stuff about my parents, but I learned so much by interviewing her for about an hour, and I'm so glad I did. Now, and I released that episode, and it's yeah, I learned so much. So after that, I was like, "Whoa, I got to interview my dad now. I got to get my dad on a podcast." So I got him, and one of the things I encourage everybody to do is like, "Hey, you should podcast with your parents, if you can, if they're still around,
Yeah.
or family members, or your kids, just to get a permanent audio record. Or if you want to video it, you can too. But I think with the audio, it puts more people at ease." And I think that was one of the coolest things that I did was podcast with my parents.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I have of course interviewed my parents. I did a full documentary on my father, but my mom, I did share a lot of her culture and everything on my show. And you're right, you just learn so much because you're just in a different capacity of conversation with them. And I was going to ask you, as an Asian American, because of course we're here trying to fight and dispel the model minority myth, but there are stereotypes and there are very typical Asian American things, such as you need to have a quote unquote real job.
Yes.
And I was curious what they thought of your career. And I mean, now that you're successful, if they still think you should be a doctor or a lawyer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely, definitely. My mom still wants me to go back get a master's, a higher education degree, maybe get a real job with stability and all the things that are supposedly more stable or real or whatever. But despite all that, they support me, but warily, I think.
And it's out of concern, though, of course.
Yeah, and I don't think lawyer or doctor is anywhere in my future, but I think at the very least that maybe I could become like an adjunct professor somewhere,
There you
teaching.
go.
I
On
think
podcasting, yeah.
at a university, I think the word university would be like the magic word for them.
Right. Yeah, Professor Chen.
Professor or even adjunct.
Are they where are they? Are they immigrants or are they born here or?
They both came separately in the mid '60s to go to college. My dad was in North Dakota. My mom was in Minnesota in Fargo, and it's a pretty interesting story, which I got podcasting with them.
Yes.
Every weekend they would bus the Asians to one campus or another to hang out, and that's how they met. And thank goodness that happened, or else I wouldn't be here.
Of course, of course. And where are they from?
My dad is from Fujian.
Fujian?
He's Fukienese, and my mom is close to the Beijing area, but they both grew up in Taiwan. After
Okay.
the Cultural Revolution, yeah, they
I
escaped.
was going to say, oh, how did they get past the language barrier? Because people who don't realize there are a lot of different dialects of Chinese and they don't all communicate and speak the same. But yeah, if they both speak Taiwanese, then that would be a commonality. Or do you speak as well?
So Mandarin, I can understand all of it because my mom yelled at me in Chinese. So
so 你会说普通话.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Speaking has been pretty rough because I never had anyone to really practice with.
Okay.
Language courses in college. I think the one that I really like was the reading and writing Chinese. But if you don't do that constantly, you lose it so quick.
Oh, it's a memory game. That's why, because it's not like you can do phonetics or spell it out. I mean, you have to memorize all the symbols. So I'm illiterate. I will fully admit.
So I know, I definitely know enough Chinese to order drinks at a bar.
The important stuff.
And to flirt with women, and that's pretty. that I can whip out pretty quick. But anything more like it's like a beautiful mind. I have to look at I have to process it in my head. And sometimes, I'll mix the two languages, but and people laugh at me. So, but
You mix English and Chinese or
oh
different
yeah,
Chinese
yeah,
dialects?
if I can't think of the word, I'll just say it in
The
English.
Chinglish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I fully understand that language actually. So
Yeah, but
interesting.
I got to go when I was younger. I got to go to Taiwan. They had a cultural exchange program, which you may have heard of, where they'll send American and Canadian-born Chinese kids to Taiwan for 6 weeks, and it's part of a whole cultural exchange program
Mhm.
subsidized by the Taiwanese government. So no, when I was 19, I got to go to Taipei for 6 weeks.
Nice.
And once you're there, you're immersed in there. Like you can't really function if you don't speak the language. So you learn very quickly, like how to order food, just how to get around, how to get a taxi.
Mhm.
If you want to have fun, you really have to learn the language and learn the culture. So I learned very quickly, and that was a great experience. And
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I mean, they say immersion is the best way to
oh yeah,
learn if you're going to want to learn a language, but you're like, I'm going to have fun, so I need to learn the language. I like your correlation between
yeah,
need to learn because I don't want to be sitting alone in my room.
yeah, and that was a life changing experience for sure. So
Yeah, what was one of the things that you kind of learned culturally? Because although you're Chinese, people don't understand like being from actual mainland or Taiwan or even Hong Kong, like being from a different country, but being Chinese American is two different cultures.
yeah, yeah, because I was born here, so I was born in Cleveland, Ohio,
Yeah.
which is funny. Is people, meeting new people, especially in the early days, like, where are you from? Taiwan, China, Hong Kong. They think it's so like cool and exotic. I was like, well, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. And they're like, oh, okay. And then yeah, not as exotic, although yeah, but yeah, but yeah, being over there, yeah, I just learned about just the deep culture and the history, and even the political climate that the Asian people had to endure
Yeah.
and fight through. It was not easy. Even my parents escaping the mainland to go to Taiwan, that was
Yes.
an ordeal as well. And I think they had it relatively easy getting out of the country. Not a lot of people had that easy experience. Um, but just seeing part of that 6 week, culture exchange immersion is, they would load you on a bus and drive you to all the monuments and memorials, and we got to see all of Taiwan. So it was definitely eye opening. Growing up in America, it's completely different. Cities and schools and they would take you to the museums and stuff on field trips and things here. But I don't think, occasionally, if you were lucky, you got to go to Washington D.C. maybe. But I don't. The deep culture and culture and art and history in Taiwan and China is so deep.
Well, it's
Definitely
much longer. We're a baby country in comparison, you
eye-opening.
know.
Yeah, but even things, like I saw my first like squat toilet in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that. Or we would go to like national parks, and they're like, well, all right, you gotta to get from here to there, you gotta cross the suspension bridge. And I was like, oh man, I don't know, man, this doesn't look so. Is this safe?
Safe.
The safety standards are a little different in Asia than they are here. But hey, where's your sense of adventure? So I was like, cross the bridge. Cross the bridge. And what's the worst that could happen? And I crossed the bridge and I made it. So
You're here.
yeah, I'm here. So yeah, I learned a lot during that trip. So yeah, and that really instilled in me is like travel is important. Meeting other people is important. Finding out about other cultures is important, and as something I wish everybody could do.
Absolutely. And hopefully, very soon, we'll all be able to do it safely and more often. But I think it was also really great that you went at the age you did, because
Yeah.
it's not like you were so young.
Yep.
You were just toted around and kind of like, yeah, we went to this museum. You're really at the age where you could kind of open your mind to learning. And
Yep.
it also helps shape, I think, who you are as you go into your 20s. It's such an impressionable trip. It's really cool that you were able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember. I'm sure you did too. Getting dragged along to museums or wherever on family trips, and it was fun. But yeah, nothing's as fun as that freedom. It's like, hey, I'm gonna, what? I'm gonna grab some friends and we're just gonna go here tonight and experience this, or that complete freedom is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love that you also brought up the understanding that there was a tense political climate. At that time, you're obviously, like 28 now, not 19 anymore. Just kidding. But yeah, but it's interesting that there's still a tense political climate over there that people don't also realize. Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, like they're not quote unquote the same country. Right. That there's a lot going on, and we need to be more worldly and aware of these different countries, what's happening, and that exists, and that there is a struggle, so it's great that you brought that up.
Yeah, for sure. I hope to go back. I went in the early 90s, so I haven't been back since then. I would love to go back to Taipei. I've never been to the mainland, which I think I really need to do. Well, once everything opens up, I think I definitely have to take a trip out there. I would love to see Hong Kong and Shanghai and Beijing.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming because there's just literally a billion people, and and you feel that, and even just culturally, not being in a place where that many humans are around all the time is jarring. Like, let alone the cultural stuff, like the language and the food and the way people are. But you understand why in different cultures they come across different ways, because a lot of times people, especially from Beijing, are considered like kind of rude and they won't hold the door open for you. I go, well, it's also, if you sit there and hold the door open and a million people go by, you'll never go. Like, it's just a go mentality. And people from maybe the Midwest thought New Yorkers were kind of like that big city and they're not as polite, but it's just such a difference in how you live.
Hong Kong, go to Tokyo.
Yes. I love Hong Kong. So I have a lot of fun memories of travel. So we are kind of coming up on time together. I know we could keep talking about all this fun culture, and you did mention you had till 7 p.m. And for those of you who are with us at the Kauai Comic-Con, we started this at 11, so we won't go on for 5 or 6 hours, but hopefully, Ming, you will join me again on my podcast and we can talk more and kind of delve into some of these things. I will finish with, what was your favorite meal in Taipei, or actually anywhere you visited? Like, I love to talk about food, but that's one of the big things I think.
Taipei, like the food was incredible there, and I was lucky. I had a relative over there, and so I got to hang out with them, and I got to they would take me out for dinner and things like that, and that was pretty incredible. I think, geez. And they would order the whole spread, so we had the Peking duck. But I think my go-to anytime, but I like the really finely crafted ones. Soup dumplings. The soup dumplings are incredible, and they're a place like Joe's Shanghai, which is big out here. It's big on, I think, Hong Kong and Shanghai definitely. Mm-hmm. But I had some really incredible soup dumplings out there, and I hope to get back to that. And I know probably the place we went to probably wasn't even like one of the best places, but I would love to go to like Joe's Shanghai in Shanghai.
Right.
Or I keep seeing like on TV, like the giant soup dumpling. I've never had that one, the one where you have to stick the straw in.
Oh, I have not had that either. But...
Yeah, that's what it's definitely on my list for sure. Yeah,
I love it. So yes, hopefully you'll come back. We can talk about food and all sorts of other fun things and more comic stuff. But I just wanted to kind of get a sense of who you are, Ming Chen, and share that with all of our wonderful listeners and everyone at Kauai Comic-Con.
I'm incredibly honored. Yeah, we're gonna have to do this live soon at Kauai Comic-Con. I can't wait for.
Exactly. I am dying to go to Kauai. So shout out and aloha to all our Hawaiian friends. And Aaron, thank you again for inviting us. And Ming, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Oh, thank you. It was a huge honor. Thank you, Sifu.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.